The aircraft carrier is the most powerful weapon system ever built. That's what they told you. $13 billion, 100,000 tons of steel, 90 aircraft, a crew of 5,000, a nuclear reactor that can run for 20 years without refueling, protected by a ring of destroyers, submarines, and missile systems so dense that nothing should be able to get close. The United States Navy has 11 of them. No other country has more than 2. And right now, every single one of them is potentially a target that can be destroyed by a weapon costing a few $100,000. Not theoretically, not in a war game scenario that gets quietly reclassified after the wrong side wins. The vulnerability is real, documented, and the people running those carrier strike groups know exactly what it is. They just can't fix it. In 2002, the United States military ran a war game called Millennium Challenge. A retired Marine general was given command of a simulated enemy force in the Persian Gulf. He was outgunned, outmanned, outnumbered. He used fast boats, unconventional tactics, and a coordinated missile barrage. In the opening hours of the simulation, he sank 16 American ships, including carriers. The Pentagon stopped the exercise, refloated the ships, changed the rules so the enemy force couldn't use those tactics anymore, restarted the simulation, and declared victory. The general who ran the enemy force resigned in protest. The tactics he used were not classified. The vulnerability he exposed was not new. It was documented, demonstrated, and then buried under a war game restart, so the official result could say the carrier group survived. That was 2002. The DF-21D entered Chinese service in 2010. Let's get into it. The carrier's entire defensive architecture is built around one assumption. Threats come from a predictable direction, at predictable speeds, and leave enough time for the defensive systems to detect, track, and intercept before they reach the ship. That assumption worked for 50 years. Subsonic cruise missiles, supersonic fighters, even early ballistic missiles. All of them gave the carrier's defensive ring enough warning time to respond. The Aegis system, the most advanced naval air defense ever built, was specifically designed around that window. Detect the threat early. Calculate the intercept solution. Fire. Kill. The window closed, and the people who closed it didn't need a bigger missile or a faster aircraft. They needed a different trajectory. Stay with me, because the exact moment this changed tells you everything about why the most expensive weapons in the American arsenal are now the most valuable targets in a conflict. In the 1980s, Soviet naval planners faced a problem. They couldn't match American carrier groups ship for ship. They didn't have the industrial capacity, the budget, or the time, so they didn't try. Instead, they asked a different question. What does a carrier group actually defend against well? And what does it defend against poorly? The answer they found became the foundation of anti-access warfare, and American naval planners saw it coming. The Soviet answer was documented, analyzed, briefed to carrier strike group commanders throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The threat was understood before the Cold War ended. The carriers kept sailing, because admitting the vulnerability meant admitting that the $1 trillion spent building carrier dominance was built on an assumption that a different trajectory could shatter. A carrier group defends well against threats coming from the horizon. Everything the Aegis system does is optimized for that geometry. Radar looks outward. Interceptors are designed for engagements at range. The entire defensive doctrine assumes the threat arrives from the side, at an angle the radar can track continuously from detection to engagement. A carrier group defends poorly against threats that arrive from above. Not aircraft, not missiles on a flat trajectory, ballistic missiles on a plunging trajectory. A ballistic missile fired at a carrier doesn't approach from the horizon. It goes up, high into the atmosphere or beyond, and then comes straight down. The terminal phase of that trajectory is nearly vertical. The closing speed at impact can exceed Mach 10. At that angle and that speed, the defensive geometry that the Aegis was designed for stops working. The radar has to look up instead of out. The intercept solution changes completely. The time between detection of the terminal phase and impact compresses from minutes to seconds. And the carrier, moving at 30 knots, predictable in its pattern, identifiable from satellite imagery hours before any missile is launched, has nowhere to go. The Chinese military spent 30 years building exactly this weapon. The DF-21D, the carrier killer, a medium-range ballistic missile with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, meaning it doesn't just fall on a fixed ballistic arc. It guides itself during the terminal phase, adjusting its trajectory to compensate for the carrier's movement. The Pentagon's official position when the DF-21D entered service was that it was a significant concern requiring further analysis. What the Pentagon did not say publicly, but what every carrier strike group commander knows, is that the Aegis system was not designed to reliably intercept a hypersonic maneuvering warhead arriving on a near-vertical trajectory. The defensive window that the entire carrier doctrine was built around doesn't exist against this threat. Here's where the flaw becomes impossible to engineer away. A carrier has to be where it is to do its job. That's the point of it. You don't sail a $13 billion ship into a contested region to hide it. You sail it there to project power, which means it has to be visible, identifiable, and in a predictable operational area. Modern reconnaissance satellites can locate a carrier strike group continuously. Commercial satellite imagery services, available to anyone with a credit card, can track the approximate position of a carrier group with enough precision to feed targeting data to a ballistic missile system. The carrier that used to disappear into the vastness of the ocean now moves under a permanent overhead watch it cannot break. And the missile designed to kill it doesn't need to be close. The DF-21D has a range of approximately 1,500 kilometers. The DF-26, its longer-range successor, extends that to 4,000 kilometers. That means a carrier operating anywhere in the Western Pacific is within range of Chinese launch sites before it gets close enough to conduct strike operations. The carrier has to move inside the threat envelope to do its job. Inside the threat envelope, it's a target. Stay with me because the cost equation makes this worse than it sounds. A DF-21D missile costs approximately $5 to $10 million to produce. The ship it's designed to kill costs $13 billion. That's a 1,000-to-1 cost ratio in the attacker's favor. And the attacker doesn't need to sink the carrier. They just need to hit it once. A single successful impact on a carrier flight deck takes the ship out of combat operations for months. The aircraft can't launch. The mission is over. The $13 billion and 5,000 sailors are no longer a factor in the battle. Not because the ship sank, but because it's no longer operational. The Navy calls this mission kill. One missile, one hit, mission kill. That calculation is why naval war planners in Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran don't need to match the United States carrier for carrier. They need to make the carrier too expensive to risk. And here is why nothing gets fixed. The aircraft carrier is not just a weapon system. It's a symbol, a political statement, the physical manifestation of American military dominance that has defined global power projection since 1945. 11 carrier groups means the United States can be present in any ocean, at any time, in numbers no other country can match. Admitting that those carriers are vulnerable, that a $10 million missile can neutralize a $13 billion ship, means admitting that the entire strategic framework built around carrier dominance is operating on borrowed time. The admirals who built careers around carrier doctrine don't say that. The defense contractors who build carriers, and the tens of thousands of jobs in those shipyards, don't say that. The politicians whose districts include those shipyards don't say that. So the official position stays the same. Carriers remain the backbone of American power projection. The threat is being studied. Countermeasures are being developed. The carrier strike group remains the most capable and survivable naval force ever assembled. Which is true, against the threats it was designed for. You, the taxpayer who funded those 11 carrier groups. The citizen whose government tells you American naval dominance guarantees stability in the Pacific, the Middle East, the Atlantic. That dominance exists against an adversary that fights the way adversaries fought in 1985. The adversary that has spent 30 years building the specific weapon designed to end the carrier era doesn't fight that way, and the people running those carriers know it. The SM-3 interceptor, the best the Navy has for ballistic missile defense, has demonstrated intercept capability against some ballistic missile threats in controlled test conditions. Controlled test conditions don't include a maneuvering re-entry vehicle arriving at Mach 10 from near vertical on a ship that can't stop moving and can't hide. The gap between the test environment and the actual threat environment is the gap that a carrier strike group commander has to live with every time they sail into a contested region. They know what's out there. They sail anyway. Because the alternative, admitting the vulnerability and pulling the carriers back, concedes the ocean to adversaries who built their strategy around forcing exactly that concession. So 5,000 sailors deploy on each carrier into a threat envelope that their commanders know has no reliable defense. They're not told the full picture in the official briefings. They're told the carrier group is the most survivable force ever assembled, which is true against the threats it was designed to survive. The carrier isn't a trap that can be sprung. It's a trap that has already been built around it. And the $13 billion sitting in the middle of that trap was never as untouchable as the people selling it needed you to believe. What happens next depends on whether the Navy acknowledges the shift before the next conflict demonstrates it, in real time, on satellite imagery that anyone can access, with a burning flight deck visible from orbit. The vulnerability has been public for 20 years. The DF-21D entered service in 2010. The carriers kept sailing. The question nobody in any naval headquarters will answer publicly is this: if the weapon designed to kill the carrier has been operational for 15 years and every serious defense analyst understands the threat envelope problem, what exactly is the plan for the next time a carrier group is ordered into range? That answer exists somewhere in a classified annex. It just isn't in the press release.